Hey everyone, meteorologist Zach Batten here for the Bell Parker Weather Network, here to take a look at your 2023 severe weather year in review. We saw a decent amount of severe weather this season, although most of it came on just kind of a few specific days. So we'll kind of break all that down, go over some of the numbers, and take a look at the year that was. So we first want to start off taking a look at our tornado count for the year. This is across the entire region, so it includes our Indiana counties, our West Virginia counties, and then of course Ohio. So 62 tornadoes is where we kind of landed this year. So that is well above average, really for our area, well above average for the state of Ohio as well. If we take a look at a bit of a different look, this is all of the reports, so your tornado, your wind, and your hail. These are all preliminary reports, so nothing finalized by the National Weather Service, the Storm Prediction Center, all those fine folks. So these numbers are subject to change a little bit, but for the most part, given that we haven't really had any severe weather since August, most of this will probably not change all too much, especially the tornado count, as most of those surveys and whatnot have been finalized, taken care of. So right now, this is, again, just for the state of Ohio in this particular case, which is mostly what we're going to focus on today. We'll touch on Indiana in particular a little bit, but for the most part, with the bulk of the severe weather being kind of in Ohio this year, that's where we're going to focus on. So 56 tornado reports, 5 of those were potentially EF2 plus. So again, based on the surveys, I'm pretty sure that's still accurate. So EF2 plus basically classifies as a significant tornado. 616 severe wind reports for the year, so pretty high up there. Interesting that we only really had a few gusts above 75 mile an hour, so kind of interesting there. And then only 66 hail reports, so you can definitely tell we don't really see a lot in the way of hail around here. So good news if you don't like hail, you don't like damage to your car, any of that stuff. But compare these numbers to the national average, or the national numbers for the year, rather. We had, so far this year, 17,534 wind reports, severe wind reports, 6,962 hail reports, 1,415 tornado reports, 69 of which were EF2 plus. The kind of 3-year running average for tornadoes for the US is 1,179. We are actually just above that for the year. We're actually about 300 above that for the year. The average, if we move up here, if we go here and then go here, you can see the average going back to 2005 is roughly about 1,380 tornadoes or so. So we're just above that, so not too far off from average. You see, we were actually kind of above average, and then we really dipped in the kind of traditional tornado season across the country, and then really picked back up towards the end of summer. So, and then even in the last couple weeks, we've seen a couple different smaller tornado outbreaks, especially we had some Tennessee, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So those are kind of the areas that have seen a couple instances of severe weather in the traditional kind of second season per se. Really kind of for the South, this is now through about May is really kind of it's normal for them, whereas not so much normal for us. So let's go ahead and take a look, kind of go month by month here. We'll flip back over to the map and we'll come back down to Ohio and flip all back on. So this is January in particular. So no tornado reports in the month of January. We did have 23 severe wind reports and 1 hail report down there in southern Ohio. The wind really came from kind of one system. If we take a look at the loop for the radar there for January, you can kind of see that system. It really wasn't too impressive, just a big blob of rain, but we had a good bit of wind energy that allowed some of that upper air wind to be transported down to the surface. And you can really see in Northeast Ohio kind of this whole thing gains a little bit of steam and almost gets a little bit of a bow shape to it as it moves through. So that allowed like that mixing of the winds down to the surface and gave us quite a few of our severe gusts. We did have a few gusts in southern Ohio, but the annoyance of trying to put together these loops, we'll have to improve that in the future. So we're focusing on northern Ohio here specifically. So moving on to February. February was an interesting month. We had 5 tornado reports, which is not super unusual, but it's not what I would call normal either. So 5 tornado reports, 14 wind reports, and 6 hail reports. And if we take a look at the kind of the days where these occurred, all but one of those reports came on the 27th of February. And if we move over and take a look at the loop for that, that's still January. We'll pop February up here. February was an interesting look. So you can, even just by looking at the radar, you can really pick out kind of the individual storms. And it's not too difficult to tell the ones that really kind of caused problems. So let's restart this. And you can see as they were coming out of Southeast Indiana, they all kind of had their own little individual storms. So when you are able to keep the storms individual like that, they kind of don't compete with energy. So they're able to typically maintain themselves and take better advantage of the environmental conditions that are out there. If you would like to see kind of a more in-depth breakdown of specific days, let me know, and I would absolutely be happy to do that in a separate video. In this particular case, we're just going to kind of gloss over some of the events and not get too much into detail, but it is fun to kind of take a look at the radar and see what it looked like as it came through. So here we go, the storms moving into Ohio, and you can already see some of them starting to get that little hook shape on the back end here. So we've got this one up here, almost approaching I-70, and then another one a little bit further to the south, and even kind of in between those and behind it, you can see these storms really kind of start getting that kind of hook shape, storms like that around here aren't super common in general, and especially in February, storms that look like that are kind of fairly rare. As we continue on, you see they all kind of were able to maintain themselves. You had really the 3 kind of right here west of Dayton are the kind of were the big ones. So as we continue to move on, as you can see as it approached Dayton, this northern one started to fizzle a little bit, but this one right here near Dayton was still looking pretty good, and that one ultimately would kind of move on, and it did end up producing a tornado there in Clark County. So interesting look to storms in February, not something we typically see. As they continue to move east, you can still see some real interesting looks on the storms. They were still able to really maintain themselves a lot longer than really was even expected. So they did go on to produce 2 more tornadoes out here near and east of Columbus. So really, once that line moved through, it was not too much behind it. A few reports of damaging wind gusts, but after that, it was primarily just rain. So with that, we'll move on to March. And March was a mostly quiet month until the end. The March 31st, kind of April 1st event was an interesting one. And that particular event, I actually chased, but I chased in Illinois. So I didn't see much in the way of, things that impacted Ohio, but I did see some cool looking storms out there in Illinois. So March, we had 12 tornado reports, 75 wind reports, and 3 hail reports. And again, if we look at kind of the day most of these occurred, the vast majority of them occurred on March 31st and into the morning of April 1st. So let's go ahead, take a look at the radars for that day. So this one's going to start off Indiana. As you can see, the storms really looking like a line of storms moving into Indiana. A few of them were kind of able to get discrete, and they did cause a couple tornadoes. And then it was mostly kind of a wind threat as it moved in, but we did see a few kind of embedded circulations. And if we stop this here for a second, you can see as the storms kind of approached Indiana, for some reason, it is not wanting to work particularly well. But you can see in this particular image, you can see kind of some of the kinks in this line here. There's kind of a bowing segment west of Indianapolis, and then a little kind of a kink. And then there's a storm out ahead of kind of the line here. And that one was definitely a tornado producer. And then as it moved east, everything kind of was still mostly linear, but we did see a couple spin-ups, again, kind of right on the Ohio-Indiana border. We did see one up kind of east of Fort Wayne as well. And then a couple, again, weak spin-ups near the Dayton area as well. So overall, for us, it was mostly, kind of a wind threat. A couple reports of hail to the north, but for the most part, wind threat with a few tornadoes in there. I believe if we take a look, I want to say one of these tornadoes did in fact cause some injuries, and I want to say, yeah, in 3 miles southwest of Wapakoneta, and this is coming right from the Storm Prediction Center's reports website. So it looks like there were 7 injuries with one of the tornadoes near Wapakoneta. So interesting day. Most of what we saw came overnight and into the early morning hours of April 1st. So out west got it significantly, worse than we did, but we didn't get anything. Originally, earlier in the day, it looked like most of this would kind of die out or be substantially weaker before it got here. But the conditions kind of escalated fairly quickly and allowed a lot of this to really hang on a lot further than expected. Now here's a few of the photos I took while I was out chasing in Illinois. These photos kind of down here towards the bottom, which is this one. This was near Peoria in one of the earlier storms of the day. And then this is still one of my favorites. The storm looked very nice as it approached Peoria. And then once it got on the other side of Peoria, I believe it did actually produce a tornado. And then this was the second storm of the day that I was on. It did also produce a tornado in one of these pictures. I couldn't see the tornado from where I was at. And really hard to see, but there's a grain elevator right down here. That grain elevator actually took a little bit of damage as the tornado crossed kind of into their yard. It did lift also right about in this area. So because of the rain that was right there, I couldn't see it. But storm surveys afterward did confirm that there was in fact a tornado. This is still one of my favorite pictures as well. Being able to see the colors of the rain and the sky really open up, just kind of really over the open fields that we don't often get this stuff around here. So sometimes you gotta travel if you want to see some of the prettier sides of nature. So moving on to April. April, we saw quite a few wind reports. Nothing particularly, crazy there. A couple tornado reports there east of Columbus. Those were primarily, and actually the tornado reports specifically were April 5th, so a few days after the first event that we just talked about. But most of the reports did come from April 1st, which was the system overnight from the west that moved in and caused a fair bit of wind damage. So May, check that out. April, May, and a little bit into June for us is kind of usually where our severe weather season peaks. And this year in May, we had one wind report. That's it, just one. So super quiet May for us. it was also pretty dry for a while there, especially kind of towards the end of the month. June, though, June picked back up, especially the middle of the month a little bit. See 12 tornado reports, and you can look at this map and pretty much see the track of the storm. We did have 41 wind reports and 12 hail reports as well. So we go ahead and take a look at the loop for June. This particular loop is showing velocity, so I'll point a couple things out in just a minute, but you can really see the track of the storm, and you can pick out the rotation definitely. So here's what we'll do. Hopefully this works better than the other one did, and it's not. Cool. So most of this, we'll just do it this way. You can see the storms really develop here in southern lower Michigan, and then they just kind of were moving east. This particular day, the threat of severe weather was, I believe it was a marginal risk. So it was very low. There wasn't too much spin in the atmosphere. Ultimately, what ended up happening, and we'll move this forward a little bit, and you can really kind of see as the storms really begin to approach the lake, that's when you'll see, you get this storm up here southeast of Ann Arbor that shows some signs of rotations. That's where the red and the greens are coming together. Those are winds to and away from the radar. And then if we move on a little bit more, you can see just northwest of Toledo, you can start to see, the brighter green showing up, indicating the enhancement in winds. And then as they continue to interact with the lake, it's a little bit hard to see in this frame, but right there on the Ohio-Michigan border, the reds and the greens are kind of touching, and then they cross into Ohio, and we definitely have a fairly strong circulation, and this ultimately did end up producing a tornado. So as we continue on, you can see it kind of crossed over the lake, and then you've still got a decent circulation here south of the lake. And then as it moves east, you've still got circulation. It did weaken a little bit in here, but did actually end up producing another tornado. And then as the whole storm moves southeast, you can still see just these areas of rotation really cycling in and out. So the tornado, for the most part, the reason ended up being 12 of them from this one storm, it was a very cyclic storm. So the rotation would tighten, it would weaken, another portion of the storm would begin rotating, and the rotation just kind of was handed off down the line. So you can see this last image here. The rotation's actually pretty tight right there, and that ultimately did end up being yet another tornado. So this storm itself, that was really the only storm in town. It did cause most of our tornado damage. There were also a couple tornadoes down again near the Dayton area, so a bit of a weaker storm did end up producing some weak tornadoes down there as well. All right, moving on to July. July was less of a busy month for tornadoes, but a very busy month for wind reports. And I don't know. Real quick, actually, before we move on to July, because I almost forgot. Our weather cam in downtown Toledo actually captured the tornado in not quite right as it began, but early on in its life cycle. You see kind of center left portion of your screen. You see it looks a little kind of dusty there on the ground. Watch that area. You can't really see like a fully condensed funnel, but you can definitely see where the rotation kind of is on contact with the ground right there. You can start to see just off to the right of the edge of the screen. And you can see some of that dust start to swirl, and that's actually our tornado. So this is as it's moving across kind of the north part of Toledo. And then as it continues on, you kind of almost lose visual of it, but it's definitely still on the ground, still kind of hanging out. And here in just a second, you'll see a power flash right there. So the tornado was definitely still on the ground. We do have a bit longer of a clip that I can go over at some other time. As it continues to move across the kind of the background there. There's a couple more power flashes, especially in the trees, before it eventually kind of moves out over the lake. So pretty cool that our camera was able to capture that. That did also kind of help the National Weather Service verify that we did in fact have a tornado there. Because as you can see, there's really no fully condensed funnel to look at. So this was, you could see the circulation on the ground, but there was really nothing connecting it into the clouds. So just because you can't see the funnel from the clouds to the ground doesn't mean it's not there. So always important to stress that, especially if you're out looking at a storm. Just because you can't see the funnel doesn't necessarily mean that there's, nothing on the ground. So always something you got to pay attention to. So as we mentioned, July, again, a fairly busy month for mostly wind. We did have a few tornado reports, a couple in Northwest Ohio, North Central, and then Northeast Ohio. Those in particular came on July 28th and then July 1st and July 29th. So the 28th, 29th, and then we did have a couple of the first of the month. So July, a little busy, mostly wind, but a little busy. And then August, again, we had an uptick in tornado reports, sitting at 20 with 107 wind reports and 12 hail reports. This was mostly from, again, kind of one complex that moved through. We did have a few smaller storms, kind of southern Ohio, that did end up producing a couple of tornadoes. But you can tell the bigger focus was definitely across Northeast Ohio. And if we take a look at the radar loop for that, a bit of a different program. This is what I was originally trying to use, and it didn't work out. But you can see this whole complex really just pick up steam really as it got over the lake. And then there was some pretty significant gusts right along the lake here as that line really just kind of crashed into the lake. A lot of times when the storms move out over the lake, they can get stronger winds. There's less friction over the water, so you don't have to, worry about really land interaction. So when they move out over the lake and then prepare to move back onto land, the winds almost kind of slam into the lakeshore. So you can get some pretty gnarly gusts along the lakeshore, and that's definitely what we had in this particular event. We did have one gust there near Cleveland measure over 75 mile an hour. So this system did cause a fair amount of damage, and we definitely saw some pretty gnarly weather. And then of course, kind of along that line, we had quite a few spin up tornadoes as well, and even a couple stronger tornadoes. We did have 2 tornadoes EF2 plus. So this line meant business. And for August, the tornado aspect is not super normal. The wind aspect is. In the summertime, we get systems that are usually called ridge riders. So essentially there's an area of high pressure, usually off to the west somewhere. It shunts the jet stream kind of to the north a little bit, and then the storms kind of just go up and around the high pressure and just kind of ride the ridge and end up, when it's positioned correctly, can end up, moving right over us. And sometimes that's how you can get, storm systems several days in a row. So taking a look at the rest of the year, believe it or not, August was the last month we had any severe reports. So September, October, November, and then so far in December, the year has been quiet. So, we've seen some dry stretches. We've seen a little bit of rain. We haven't really seen much in the way of thunderstorm activity at all. So the way things are looking for the rest of this month, the thunderstorm activity doesn't look like it's going to be too much of a problem. The month is going to be warm, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news if you are looking forward to a white Christmas. Right now, it's looking like the chances of that across the entire region are fairly slim. So, unfortunate, it's still, the chance still isn't zero, but, as we get closer, it's looking less and less likely as we look to kind of continue to see temperatures above average. So, the caveat to that is, with your above average temperatures, and a lot of times you get the warmer air and the colder air clashing a little bit, that does often lead to, a chance for some thunderstorms or rain at the very least. So for the areas that need rain, that's great. If you're looking for thunderstorms, that means your chances also aren't zero. So they're realistically about as good as, seeing snow at this point. So with that will wrap up our 2023 severe weather recap. We hope you enjoyed this video. And again, if you would like to see any breakdowns of specific events or more details about something, let me know in the comments, and then I will go check those out. I can get more videos together to go over specific events in more detail, kind of explain the science of what happened. And then, if you're into that kind of stuff, great. If not, then I will see you next time for a different video. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook at Ohio News and Weather, and also check out our daily forecast videos. They go up almost every morning. This particular week, we switched it up a little bit because the weather this week was very nice, so not much going on, and that gave me time to produce this video. So I appreciate you all for watching. If you made it this far, thank you. Be sure to give the channel a subscribe to catch more videos like this. Don't forget to like this video in general, and then leave a comment down below if there's anything you want to see, future video ideas, anything like that. Have a great day, everyone.